Welcome to Sip of Cinema, the only podcast that's just little and tiny and just really cute all over. I'm Alex.
I'm Andres.
And today we're talking about miniatures, doing a deep dive into miniatures. This is going to be really fun. So we decided to talk about miniatures because it's one of the most, I think, it has impacted so many films across history, and it's just, I don't know, really interesting and really fun. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah. It is miniatures is definitely one of the fine arts of film, specifically from like the 20th century. More so than we think.
Yeah.
With the rise of like CGI and visual effects like that, there's a steady decline with pros and cons. But I think it's something that needs to be paid homage to.
Agreed. And so that's what we're here to do today, Andreas. While we're on the topic, let's go ahead and talk about our little drinky poos today.
Yeah. So miniatures are mini, as we all know. So what better drink than wine minis?
Little mini wines.
I hope that mic bump didn't disturb y'all too much.
Yeah, well, it's too late to cut that anyway.
Exactly.
We're talking through
We're
it.
still
So
going.
yeah, little mini wines. So yeah, we're just going to be taking little baby sips of these little baby wines, talking about little baby miniatures all day today. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we both have different films that we want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, you want to go ahead and talk about one of yours first?
Well, I think before I dive into that, I just want to cover a little bit about where miniatures have come from, right?
Word.
So in particular, the birthplace of miniatures, and for reference here, miniatures is miniature like figurines. So typically you would see this in terms of like buildings and cars and stuff like that. A lot of action movies from the 20th century really like to use that for the sake of explosions and stuff like that. Get big effects that, quite frankly, you just can't always blow up a tank in real life for a movie, as tragic as that is.
Unfortunate.
We don't all have Michael Bay money. So this is a much more effective way to go about that. There's a lot of skill and craftsmanship that goes into it. And the birthplace of miniatures in film actually came from a little ditty in 1902 called A Trip to the Moon.
Yeah, the first movie they make you watch in film school.
Yeah, exactly. It's iconic. Also featured in a Smashing Pumpkins music video. I don't remember which one, but yeah, this was 1902, A Trip to the Moon, French little film. It's roughly like 23 minutes in length.
The moon is 23 inches.
Yeah, well, it may have
That'd be mini,
been.
bro.
That would be mini. And what you see there is a rocket ship going across space and then hitting the moon in the eye, which I think is pretty rude. But that's a little silent film, and that was the original, the first use of miniatures in film, which I think is really interesting. You can actually go watch that on YouTube for free if you want to go check out, where miniatures started from. And then from there, I mean, the world was your oyster. You just started to take off. What are, outside of the films that we watched for today, I'm curious, Andreas, do you have any particular standouts from maybe like early 20th century that interest you?
I mean, yes, not from specific films, but from specific filmmakers.
Okay, that's super fair. I guess early 20th century, I was just thinking, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and cut to the chase here. When I think of miniatures, I think of like pre-ILM and post-ILM, which is basically like pre-Star Wars and post-Star Wars.
I thought you meant like early. Well, in that case, I got a list, brother.
That's fair. No, I know you've got some kaiju picks in the back of your brain that you're thinking of, some Godzilla movies and whatnot. But in particular, I guess where I'd like to start in terms of the movies that I watched for this was A New Hope with Star Wars. And much like I just mentioned a moment ago, the reason why I chose that movie in particular to start with is because that movie was the beginning of ILM. For those who don't know, ILM is Industrial Light and Magic, and that is the VFX studio that George Lucas started specifically for the Star Wars movies because he knew how ambitious they were going to have to be.
Bro, George Lucas, this is kind of going off track a little bit.
I doubt it.
What a cool little nerd, bro.
Yeah, he really
has
is.
So many little things that have actually substantially changed filmmaking whether you like Star Wars or not, I'm
Mhm.
not just talking about that, but like he is a pioneer of so many things,
Mhm.
and I just feel like the world owes so much to him.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, I
So
mean, difficult. I'm sure you could if you really wanted to, but difficult to name a person that was more impactful on the world of cinema than George Lucas, at least in America.
yeah, he him and Spielberg during that time when they were real buddy buddy,
Hmm.
um, were just making waves that no one could surf.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and that's so true for ILM because so ILM was pretty much I don't want to, I hesitate to call it the first, but it was one of the first times that a lot of the different aspects of visual effects were compiled under one house to just be a VFX studio, and it has grown into like without a doubt the top dog in VFX. And so for reference, if you weren't aware of this, Star Wars A New Hope was the first time that the first movie that ILM worked on. Since then, they went on to do every single Star Wars movie, including the ones that are still coming out today. Every single Jurassic Park movie, including the Jurassic World movies, every single Indiana Jones movie. They worked with Spielberg actually on a couple of movies as well. I mean, the repertoire of ILM is astounding, and I guess it shouldn't come as a huge surprise that being that it's, you know, it was started by George Lucas and he still has some impact there today, that a lot of Disney movies also like Pirates of the Caribbean and stuff like that use ILM. Obviously now they focus a little bit more on, you know, like CGI and virtual effects, but the practical is still definitely there and it's still utilized. I mean, you can see miniatures used in some of the newer Star Wars movies whenever they're having any sort of like big set where you're going to see like million, or I don't know, maybe not millions, but like hundreds of stormtroopers. They use that same old trick that's been used for like 100 years, where you just have a bunch of little minis on a set and then you overlay that with footage of like the actual people that are going to be moving.
And
So
in a lot of frames in A New Hope, and I think specifically in New Hope, stormtroopers are actually painted. I learned this week actually listening to the Deacons podcast, but yeah, they painted like that shot that's the hangar, you know, they're painted on there. They're not actually like figures or people. It's just,
yeah,
which is sick.
it's super sick. It's super sick. And so like the instances in A New Hope where you see miniatures, I mean, will probably not surprise you. It's things like the spaceships, planets, the Death Star, obviously. But what I think is so interesting is just, or I guess why I was stoked to make this episode about miniatures and why I am like fairly passionate about talking about it is just because the level of detail and craftsmanship that goes into making something like that is truly insane. I mean, you have to think about how big you want this to be in it. Like for instance, taking like the Death Star as an example, you have to think about how big you want that to be in the world of that you're building and scale everything down accordingly. And you have to give it a certain amount of roughage to give it a little bit of age, right? Because it's not like everything is going to be shiny and brand new all the time. You have to think about how things are going to look in scale. So for example, early effects of the explosions that you see in things like early, you know, the original Star Wars trilogy, those are explosions that are done on like with like a black plate behind them. Just film the explosion and then comped on. But you have to think about what that explosion would look like if you're blowing up something that's the size of a moon, right?
Yeah.
And so there's just an incredible amount of both craftsmanship, engineering, and you know, maybe I'm a sucker for it, but a little bit of math that goes into it that I just can't help but appreciate, because the people that have made most of the movies that we all know and love are just absolute freaks behind the scenes, and they get no real recognition. I'm not going to lie, I didn't remember a whole lot of the names myself, so don't expect that. But I definitely will be encouraging y'all to go check some of that stuff out. So that's why I chose A New Hope to launch with, because ILM has just been a powerhouse, and it's fascinating to know that the miniatures work that they did for A New Hope was like where that all began.
Yeah. You know, speaking of A New Hope, to go off the track a little bit, a film I wish I thought about researching before we started filming today, I literally just thought about it just now, is 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Well, actually, fun fact.
Lay it on me.
I would love to. I would love to. So when when Lucas was putting together ILM,
Mm-hmm.
the person who he wanted to be in charge of all of the practical effects that had anything to do with like miniatures or anything like that, he actually originally went to the person that Kubrick used for 2001: A Space
Oh,
Odyssey,
sick.
and that person was going to be a part of the original team. However, there was a conflict and he wasn't able to. So it was that person's recommendation that wound up being the miniatures person for ILM originally, which I don't know, is not maybe not actually that fun of a fact, but it's just you can it makes sense though, right? But like if you
Mm-hmm.
all the spaceships that you see in 2001: A Space Odyssey,
Yep.
to be able to create like have that same kind of effect, like the opening of A New Hope, where you have the ships just passing
Just
over the camera.
yeah.
But anyways, I feel like I stole the torch from you a little bit. Go
No,
ahead.
that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
That's sick to know. It's just, especially since 2001 came out a whole decade
Mm-hmm.
before A New Hope, and they laid the groundwork for a lot of what A New Hope did, and A New Hope freaking ran with it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But it's boggling that that came out in the 60s, but the miniature work in that film still looks extremely convincing.
Yeah.
Um,
It just reminds me of another reason why I was so stoked to talk about this, because I feel like it is so easy to look at movies from like the year 2000 and look at the CGI that they used, and like it looks like crap,
mhm.
and it just does not age well at all. The technology has not worked for them, but miniatures do, because it's all practical, right? It essentially, if you have a good enough cinematographer, you have good enough lighting, you've painted it well, you know, like all of that typical kind of craftsmanship that you do, it does age well.
Mhm.
And there, I don't know, there's just a certain beauty in that,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
No, 100%. And that's my main reason in always arguing practical over CGI. In not in everything, but in almost everything. If you can do it practical, I'm always a firm believer that you
If
should
it
do
makes
it
sense to
practical.
do it practical, then do it. You know, don't
Obviously,
shy away.
yeah, then obviously like budgeting and things like that factor in,
Sure.
and time. Um, but the example I always say is look at the Lord of the Rings trilogy,
Mhm.
how that holds up versus, stuff that was using CGI at that time.
Yep.
Also, I find that CGI quality has digressed in recent times. So, for example, everyone always talks about like with peak CGI design.
You talking about the Flash movie?
No, but I can talk about that if you want. Everyone always talks about like peak CGI is Pirates of the Caribbean.
Mm.
With what's his face?
Davy Jones.
Davy Jones, yeah.
That face, I mean,
I see it, like I see people talk about it on Twitter or wherever at least like once every couple months
mhm.
because it holds up so well. And that was 2006.
Yeah.
And then you look at CGI work now, almost 2 decades later,
Right.
and it looks substantially worse.
Sure. Well, I mean, and I get what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree with it. I would say that it's the rush
Mhm.
that people have put on VFX artists, not necessarily like the quality of the work could be there if you just gave people the pay and the time.
Uh-huh.
Shout out episode 1.
Yeah, always, bro. But no,
Always.
that's what I was working towards.
Yeah.
Where we're in a system where they won't allow that.
Mhm.
And that's also something that's kind of wrong with practical effects too, in their eyes, where like they don't want to take the time to make it physically, shoot it, risk it not going well, having to make it again.
Sure.
That's all a factor as well. And they want to cut every corner they can. I understand that. But I will always say, not always, but almost always say practical over CGI every time.
Man's is heated.
I am,
y'all.
bro. I'm so passionate about this,
Yeah,
dude.
no, I get it. I get it.
But no, yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to touch up about on A New Hope, or?
Well, not necessarily. No, I feel like that pretty much covers it. It's just the quality of the work is there, and it does hold up. And I think that the level of craftsmanship, the care that went into it is all the reason why. And miniatures, what I think is really fun about miniatures is that they're both there for a practical reason, but also they can be used in really stylized sense. And I know that you did a little bit of Wes Anderson watching for this as well, right?
I did do a good amount
Yeah.
of Wes. Well, not watching, but just prepping.
Sure.
My favorite example of miniatures in Wes Anderson's work is the hotel in Grand Budapest Hotel.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Obviously, he uses it in like a lot of his works, his stop motion stuff too, but
Sure.
we're not really going to dive into that. But Fantastic Mr. Fox,
Mhm.
Isle of Dogs. The man knows what he's doing when he's working with miniatures.
Right. But it's for what I think is interesting there, and I would love to hear you kind of like talk a little bit more about this, is the way that he uses miniatures. He's not trying to make things look realistic.
No.
It's purely stylized. Like in Grand Budapest Hotel, the little gondola on the little string.
Yes.
Like it like, you know, it kind of chugs along or whatever. It's like adorable.
And that's something that I feel like when you're working on a big film, like a blockbuster type film, you feel like you're not allowed to do that. Obviously, this is just what I think people feel.
Sure.
I've never done it, so I might be talking out my ass.
I don't think
so. With when you're pulling off a big stunt or a grand shot or whatever that you might need to use miniatures for, they want to go for that, you know, photorealism. They want it to look as close to reality as possible. But if you have personality, style, a touch of you in it, I always feel like that goes so much further.
Yeah.
Kind of in the same vein, but not really, with Oppenheimer when they did the bomb exploding.
Yeah.
Not really a miniature, but kind of like the explosions you were talking about in Star Wars. Obviously he wasn't gonna get a nuke. He could CGI a nuke.
Tragically, you
Absolutely.
know, we all wished he could have gotten a nuke.
If anyone was gonna get it, it was him.
Yeah, he was
but,
right.
But the way Christopher Nolan made that explosion, I thought was a much better choice than any way he could have gone by CGIing a giant mushroom cloud.
Yep.
You know, something that we've all seen many times over, you know, a mushroom cloud shot.
Well, and it made a difference for the actors too, because they were able to see the explosion. You know, I know at least a certain number of the actors were able to actually be there when they saw when the explosion went off, and they were obviously, it's not like it was all filmed live time, like they were reacting to it live on the film or anything like that, but they were able to get sort of a sense of what they were supposed to be looking at in real life, so that they knew how to respond. And that's another reason why I think, well, just, I guess this is more of like a practicals thing as opposed to like miniatures specifically, but there is a difference in the way that people are able to react to being able to see what they're supposed to be responding to for miniatures or practical perspective, as opposed to looking at like a ball just to get the eye line right, and then it all gets replaced digitally afterwards. Like that, you can get a little bit more visceral response to a lot of that stuff, and I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, 100%. But to reel it back to Wes Anderson.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't apologize. With the hotel in Grand Budapest Hotel, you see it very early on in the film, and then you see it throughout it as well, close to the end. And I feel like if he were to just pick a location, pick a hotel that existed, shoot there, or even make like a soundstage with like a lot of the hotel, but like not the whole building, we don't get the full experience of this is where they are, this is what we're looking at. And he makes it work in a beautiful way. He's curated a style where a miniature can feel right at home, which is something that I feel a lot of films struggle with. There's something about miniatures that can be really jarring is seeing it being low quality and it immediately pulls you out of the film. Yeah. I feel like that's easier to get pulled out of a film by than below par CGI, because we're used to expecting CGI.
Sure.
But when you see below par miniature work, it's like, oh, this is very obviously, you know,
it almost has like a homemade element to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It feels like a you know, a student film,
just amateurish. Yeah, like kids with their camcorder making something in their backyard, which that has charm as well.
Sure.
And this is also something I'm going to touch up on when I talk about kaiju movies.
All right,
but but there's a difference between jarring and noticing something and it complementing the work.
Right.
And that's a fine line that Wes Anderson walks very well.
Yeah,
not just
sure.
in Grand Budapest, but also like in Asteroid City. You haven't seen Asteroid City, have you?
No, I have not, but I do know that that's one of the most recent examples of miniatures being used, like
Yes.
up the wazoo.
Yes, absolutely. There's one shot in particular where, very mild spoilers, but nothing game changing.
Sure.
When the alien comes down
Mm-hmm.
from the UFO for the first time.
There's an alien? Just
Shut
kidding.
up. That's all miniature work. And once again, stylized in a way that works so much better than if he were to have just CGI'd,
Yeah.
an alien. And it's just, with things that are practical, you have to have it in a correct style that won't take you out of it to succeed.
Right.
And that's all that's what I'm wrapping around in circles over and over
No,
again.
no, no. I think that's super fair. I think when it comes to Wes Anderson in particular, what I think really, really works about his miniature work is that it matches everything else about the movie as well.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, if you're looking at, well, I guess you could look at any of his movies, but in particular, I don't know why, but Moonrise Kingdom stands out in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Those kids don't talk the way kids talk.
No.
Like the dialogue does not match the way that typical people act or talk or anything like that, but it's a part of the story. It's a part of you getting the feeling that this is both there's something kind of uncanny about it, but like in an adorable way. I don't know, but it's something that he has mastered. This is his style. This is the way that he wants to tell his stories, and the miniatures work add up to that. I think that's what matters the most if you're going for a non-photorealistic approach with miniatures. It has to match the tone of everything else in the movie. Like you should be able to see the miniatures and hear the dialogue and understand that there's a connection between the two. It all flows. Otherwise, it's just going to be crap, to be honest. So with that being said, I figured I'd go ahead and lend myself over to the next movie that I watched for this, which was The Impossible. So for those who don't know, The Impossible is a 2012 movie that stars just the babiest little Tom Holland you've ever seen in your life. Before he was Spider-Man, he was just a child who got caught in a tsunami somewhere in Southeast Asia.
Happens to the best of us.
It really does. It really does. I'm always saying that. I'm always saying that. And so the moral of the story is we follow this white family as they vacation in a Southeast Asian resort, and then a tsunami comes, and then we continue to focus on the white family and not the natives. But it is a real story. It's a real account of what actually happened to this family, and so I'm not going to fault them too hard for that. If it was a made up story, I would be like, can we focus on anybody but the white people? But this is a real story, so for what it's worth. And so where the miniatures come in for The Impossible is, well, okay, let me back up. The reason I chose The Impossible is because miniatures and disaster movies just kind of go hand in hand. Not all the time, but I mean, if you're going to blow something up and you want it to look real, you're going to use miniatures, And so the set that they had was, I think, roughly a 1/6 size of the actual resort with like the pool. They had like huts, like cabanas or whatever that everybody was staying in and stuff like that. And then they actually like rushed just an absolute gargantuan amount of water through it, and then naturally had like the motion rigging and everything to kind of capture the water as it went through and destroyed everything. And I think the reason why I chose The Impossible was just because it's actually a pretty decent movie. I mean, there's some real kind of guttural stuff in that movie outside of that one scene that focuses on the miniatures. There's not a ton of miniature work outside of that scene, but it is, I think, a good case for using practical effects, miniatures in particular in this case, for disasters. Because, I mean, if you compare this to something like, I mean, and it came out in 2012. If you compare it to the actual movie 2012, or really just any of 50% of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's repertoire, right. I want to see, like, it does look very real, and the way they comped in the actors and everything for all these scenes looks very real, and you do feel that real sense of fear. It's not a situation where it's all action and it's pumped up for action. You're supposed to have your heart racing and there's a lot of adrenaline going or anything like that. Like, if you are in that situation and there's a tsunami out of nowhere that just absolutely washes you and everybody you are around away into like this really disgusting murk where you're just getting battered by car parts and just anything that's getting washed away in that water, like you should be feeling fear in that situation. And this movie did that really well. It's just interesting to see some of the background of it because they had to rebuild this set so many times to be able to get the different angles.
Something like a tsunami, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely,
because it gets destroyed every time. I mean, and that's one of the you were talking about like you should do practical effects, but when it makes sense monetarily, like they clearly budgeted for it and knew that they were going to do this practically with miniatures the entire time, because otherwise I don't see how it makes sense for you to rebuild a set like 6 different times. And like, if you miss the shot, if something goes wrong, dog. Like, good luck.
That's a huge chunk of budgeting gone too.
Yeah.
Plus, you can you're scheduled to shoot a specific amount of time. So if you have to add a day to your shoot, that takes out such a huge chunk. You have to bring all the crew back. You have to bring the talent back. You have to explain it to the studio why you have to do it, and just. So I understand why people are scared of that, but when it's properly planned for, it works beautifully.
And this was one of those situations. That's why I wanted to highlight it. It's I don't know. I guess it's just it was what I thought was a good representation of disaster movies, especially because it's not like overused or anything. It's just like they knew that this was the one shot that they wanted to use it for. They knew that they wanted to go really hard on it, which they did. I mean, it did take about 10 minutes for the water to officially wash over like the entire resort or something like that. But even then, when the way that they shot it, I wasn't mad about it because it was done really well. I felt like they did put a lot of thought and heart into it. But there are other types of disaster movies that use miniatures as well. And with that, allow me to pass the torch.
So this is something I've been wanting to talk about since we decided to make a podcast.
Dog, since he was born.
Since I was born. All right, quick lore dump on y'all.
Oh, shit.
There is nothing I love more than Godzilla.
That's true.
That I owe my whole existence to Godzilla.
You
I would do anything for Godzilla.
You should have brought your Godzilla plush.
I'm so stupid,
Why
bro.
didn't you?
Oh my god.
What are you thinking?
That would. Anyways. And as many of you know, Godzilla uses hella miniatures.
Yep,
It
so
is
true.
literally a dude in a suit walking around a tiny city.
Godzilla is a miniature, bro. When you think about it.
And also, this is a very timely subject matter because we have so much Godzilla stuff coming out right now, but none of it is miniature work Godzilla, which is the first time it's really a thing. So Godzilla -1 already out in Japan, comes out December 1st in the US. We have the Godzilla TV show coming out this month, plus an American Godzilla film coming out early next year. Does it use miniatures? No, none of those do.
Well,
I mean, I haven't seen them. I might be lying to you.
Yeah, well, but probably not.
So miniatures were the staple in Godzilla films until Americans started making them, starting in the 98 one. But even then, Japan continued to do the miniature format for everything they did up until 2016 Shin Godzilla was the first time Toho made one where it wasn't a dude in a suit. One that I specifically want to talk about is Godzilla 2000.
Classic. Yeah, what are you going to say about it?
I recently saw it in theaters again a couple weeks ago. Very spiritual moment. That's the first Godzilla movie I ever saw in theaters 23 years ago.
Wow.
And then it was a real life coming together moment when I sat down in that chair.
I bet.
What I've forgotten about that film, though, is it was really the first one that used CGI as well as miniature work. So obviously, Godzilla is still a dude in a suit.
Sure.
But they CGI'd jets. The antagonist is CGI'd when he's like, there's a UFO that spawns the antagonist of the film.
Sure.
That's CGI'd in. And it is such a stark difference between the quality of the CGI work and the quality of the miniature work. There's also some bad green screening.
Sure.
Which was around since the beginning of Godzilla films.
Right. At a certain point, that becomes like a part of the story.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Tying into what you said earlier about charm being added to like
Yeah.
the look of things.
Intentional style.
Exactly. With the miniature work in Godzilla and other kaiju films like Gamera and everything like Ultraman, Kamen Rider, all that stuff, the charm of it really blossoms with like very obviously, hey, that's not a real tank.
Yep.
That's an RC car.
Yep.
We all know.
Yeah.
But in Godzilla 2000, there's one shot specifically where these jets come in and it just looks like something from like, it looks like a PowerPoint transition is the only way. It's not actually a transition, but that's what like it made me think of. And it jars you out of the film, like I was saying earlier, which is really terrible because
we should put a little clip of that in the video.
Oh, I will.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah.
It's really terrible because it's one of the most beautifully shot Godzilla. My favorite shot from any Godzilla film ever is in that one where you see the protagonist driving in their like car away from Godzilla.
Yeah.
And he's in the background just wrecking havoc.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Beautifully framed everything. And that is green screened. Absolutely. But it doesn't look green screened. But then there are moments where it's very obvious. And you just wish that everything was just
a little bit better.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, all the films use green screen, even the original 1954 one, and it's very obvious in there. But it's just sick how movies like Godzilla and other kaiju films influenced so many other Western works. Like Power Rangers, you owe that to kaiju movies, bro.
So true.
Every time they get in their what's the big mech called?
Yeah, the
Megazord,
the Ranger-tronic, right? Yeah, sure.
Anyways, that is directly from things like Ultraman, and there's the show that Power Rangers is based off of from Japan, or at least I think it's based off of it. It might be the other way around, but
bro. Side note, just because you're talking about kaiju, I just have to mention ILM also did the VFX for Pacific Rim, even though there weren't any miniatures in there. I just had to throw that out there.
Bro, and Pacific Rim is a sick example about how CGI can work in kaiju films. Granted, the legendary films, there's good CGI work, but every shot is super dark and grainy. That's like the main complaint of most of them. Godzilla vs. Kong kind of remedied that a little bit, especially with the Hong Kong sequence with the neon lights and everything. Yeah. But I don't know, man. It doesn't feel like a true kaiju film without miniatures, without a dude in a suit. Especially in like late Showa era. So that's up until Terror of Mechagodzilla, which I want to say was 1974, right? Something like that. Where it's extra campy. Godzilla versus Megalon is a great example. Jet Jaguar, who I'm proudly wearing on my shirt.
Right. There we go.
That's the campiest Godzilla film. Really uses the fact that they're in suits to its advantage. It really humanizes the movements of Godzilla, where he's moving like a person. He's not moving like a monster like he does in other films. And it uses it to its advantage. Sure, some people don't like it, but I think that it just elevates it in that way. Also, like we said with Wes Anderson, your style has to elevate the miniature work. The miniature work has to elevate your style.
Yep, 100%. 100%. So with that being said, I'm so excited to start talking about Independence Day.
Me fucking too, bro.
Dude. Okay, so yeah, I chose... okay, so before I talk about why I chose Independence Day, I just have to say, and I'm not going to do this on every episode, but I will if you keep making this mistake. Why did you give it 3 stars? Because... They're fine. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
No. I mean, to be fair, a lot of the movies, like the Godzilla movies I just talked about that I love so much, a lot of them have 3 stars or less too.
That's so true.
You know,
that's so true. See, I give it 4 stars because I voted with my heart, not my brain. You know,
dude, rate it however you want to rate it.
Yeah, you're so right. You're so right. Anyways, so also my last diatribe about Independence Day is that I really wish we had gotten more movies with Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum together.
Absolutely. That's a very winning combo right
What
there.
a phenomenal combo. So the reason I chose Independence Day is because if you don't know, Independence Day holds the record for the most number of miniatures ever used in a movie. Roughly 4,000 different miniature figurines were made for this movie, which the director estimates to be more than any other two movies combined.
That's insane.
Yeah, it is insane. It is insane. And it's likely going to continue to hold that record forever because right after, so Independence Day came out in 1996. And for those who don't know, pretty soon afterwards is when Jurassic Park came out, which was originally going to have a lot of miniatures. And obviously there's some animatronics in there, but Jurassic Park ILM was done with a lot of visual effects as well, with like CGI. And really kind of launched where CGI was going to be able to go into the future. They did use in Jurassic Park. I know Jurassic Park is in the movie I'm supposed to be talking about, but whatever. Let me talk. This is my podcast. They still used a lot.
I mean, that's a valid point.
Yeah, fair enough. They still use miniatures in movies like Jurassic Park and some of the late 90s, early 2000s movies for the sake of being able to get the model and light it under different scenarios and know how they should light it and what the light refraction should look like in their CGI thing. So stuff like that still gets done up until roughly like 2015 when, technology kind of caught up and they were able to do a lot of that purely through computers. But with Independence Day, over 4,000 miniatures used. And just the scale of being able to do that is insane. I was reading an article where there was an interview with the director, and he was talking about how he would sit down for lunches at an Italian restaurant nearby, where they were recording with the lead VFX people and the DP and stuff like that, and they're all just sitting there talking about how they need to they're like, okay, so we blow up New York on Monday, and so then are we blowing up the White House on Friday or Thursday? And everybody else in the restaurant is real freaked out by that conversation.
FBI.
And so it's just so awesome. I mean, every single jet a miniature. Every single spacecraft a miniature, all the cars that get blown up miniatures, all the cities that get blown up miniatures. So if you think about like the kind of the first attack in Independence Day where the aliens are blasting their lasers down, they're blowing up New York and stuff like that, and that explosion is kind of just going radially outwards, is such a beautiful shot. And what is so interesting is like some of the problem solving they had to do to be able to get there, because miniatures does not always mean just scale down what you want it to look like by a certain scale, and then you get the effect that you want. For those who don't know, explosions yes, they go out radially a little bit just because physics, but they really go up because hot up, cold down. So they go upwards. So when you're looking at Independence Day and you see the explosion kind of spread throughout the city and like create this ring of fire, the way that they did that was they created I think in general, the scale they went with was like 1/12 scale of New York City. And they scaled it down. They had to set it up vertically and then set off an explosion so that and then have the camera on the other end of the city kind of scoping inwards so that the explosion would actually race through the city, creating the effect that they wanted, where everybody's like racing through the streets, trying to get out of the way in time. And there's just some really interesting problem solving that goes on there that I don't know. Maybe I'm a nerd, but I think it's really interesting.
Dude, yeah. And it lets artists be artists. The whole mentality of fix it in post kills the soul of so many films.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just so cool to be able to see people be like, okay, flame goes up. We needed to go radially, exactly.
Horizontally or whatever.
Which also brings up a good point that I'm very passionate about.
Okay.
Everything in film does not have to be accurate.
Yeah.
It does not have to be accurate. It's like how like people are kind of roasting Ridley Scott right now because his Napoleon film that's about to come out has a lot of historical inaccuracies in it just in the trailers. And he effectively literally told them, get a life. I think it's cool. I think everyone should approach filmmaking with that ideology.
Like, unless you're making a freaking biopic, like what does it matter?
Well, it is a biopic.
Well, I guess documentary, I should say, not necessarily a biopic.
Exactly. So I think that's something that miniatures get out of films that CGI work doesn't, where it's just like we said earlier, with style, it has to wrap in with the director's style.
Yeah.
It allows them to have a style to begin with.
Yep.
And it's just, I don't know, you can have more of a touch on it, and flames should go radially.
Yeah, and why shouldn't they, right?
Mhm.
When you're dealing with alien technology, who says that it has to follow normal rules, right? And there's I think that that's so true. And when you do take the approach of wanting to do things practically, you've set out ahead of time. There's just inherently going to be some problem solving you got to do on the spot.
Yeah.
Like they tried to do it normally, and that just didn't work out. So that's when they decided they needed to flip it and kind of move things on the spot. I think too much to your point when you're saying just the fix it and post stuff. And let's be clear, I'm not like a CGI or virtual or post kind of hater at all by any means. I think that everything has a time and a place. But when you go into a movie with the mentality, much to the detriment of the continued success of like Marvel or something like that, and your idea is that it can all be fixed in post, like, no, it can't. Straight up. Like when you're going into it practically, you decide this is what we're going to do. And like, you don't have the option to just like change things, and certainly not to still have a successful movie. You think that even if Independence Day was made a decade later, right? 2006, let's say, and like that shot wasn't working and they just decided to do it in post, they would not have matched what they already had for the rest of the movie. And they wouldn't have gotten the awards that they got. I mean, they got an Academy Award for VFX, and that movie also won an Oscar too. So I do not think that like that would have held up.
It's the same thing.
Sorry. Yeah. That's what I meant.
But no, to kind of build off of that, Independence Day is a Roland Emmerich film, right? He's the director, right?
Yep.
Just look at him 2 years later with the 1998 Godzilla. He directed that. Completely CGI'd. There is some miniature work in it, yes, absolutely, but just a 2-year difference, and then technology had advanced so much that he went a completely different route. And the film,
because Jurassic Park came out in between those.
Well, Jurassic Park came out in 94.
It did come out in 94.
So maybe it's the sequel that you're talking about.
I think it is the sequel that I'm thinking of. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm on my second mini.
I'm about to let me
It's all...
get that crisp audio.
Gotta get that ASMR.
It's just, with things like CGI and other like technological post things, they advance so quickly that it can influence a filmmaker so quickly, and it creates lazy filmmakers. It creates lazy filmmaking just like that. Now, I'm not saying it's lazy to be a visual effects artist and work hundreds of hours on something.
Certainly not.
I'm not discrediting
not
the
at all.
work. I'm just saying, in general, it pays off to go practical. Absolutely.
I mean, with Independence Day, I do not think that, I mean, maybe with the technology that we've had in like roughly the last 5 years, they could have pulled this off. But the most iconic scene from Independence Day is without a doubt when the White House blows up.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
It's a 1/12 replica of the White House. They had...
You gonna make it?
Fuck, I guess not. 1/12 replica of the White House. They had real furniture inside. Nothing was like painted on the outside or anything like that. Everything was painstakingly done, and they got it done in one take, and that became the most iconic shot of not only Independence Day, but borderline, I would say, of that year. I mean, it's people still talk about that today just because it was so impactful, and like that's what you can get. Kind of like the point that I was trying to make with The Impossible, a lot of destruction also obviously in Independence Day. You get like actual shards of stuff flying at the camera, and the light on a piece of wood flying at a camera is so hard to get that diffusion right in visual effects. And there's certainly ways that you can do it, and you can model it, you can turn it into a simulation or something like that. But like I said, I don't think before like maybe the last 5 years, the tech was really there to be able to process something like that, for it to look and feel as real as it felt in Independence Day. And that's why I chose Independence Day to talk about. I mean, if you're talking about miniatures, you can't not talk about Independence Day. But that being said, we're coming close to the end of the podcast episode. Sadly. So before we go, I just wanted to highlight one thing really quick, and that is the fact that outside of Wes Anderson and specific niche cases where someone wants a stylized look, like miniatures, go in stop motion, like I mentioned. But we're gonna have an episode about stop motion later, so subscribe. But there are still use cases of miniatures being used in fairly modern movies. So, for example, what's it called? The Dark Knight. So that scene where, the Batmobile goes through the tunnel, there's like a semi truck that gets flipped over. That was very intentionally done with miniatures because it just didn't feel like you could get that same effect with visual effects. There's the base in Inception, like towards the end of the movie.
Yeah.
That is actually, you can call it a miniature if you want. There's actually kind of a term like mega miniatures.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Where like the miniature is certainly a miniature. I mean, it's not a full building, but it's also like 12 feet tall. So there's just a certain level of detail you can get with a certain scale. So that also uses miniatures. Hogwarts in the Harry Potter movies, miniatures. You mentioned Lord of the Rings earlier.
Yeah.
A lot of the cities are done in miniatures. So like, you want to get a certain feel or texture for your cities and stuff like that, big kind of cities and buildings and stuff like that. A lot of that is still done with miniatures today. And I think that is absolutely to the benefit of the movies that these directors are creating. So I just wanted to highlight that really quick. Don't think that it's, I mean, maybe, yes, you could call it a dying art form, but it's not dead and it still has a place. And I encourage you all to go out there and, let us know what your favorite use of miniatures was in film.
Yeah. Leave a little comment.
Leave a little comment. Why not? What do you got to lose? We're waiting for it. So with that being said, Andres, of the movies that you watched in preparation for today's episode, what would be your recommendation?
Well, I think everyone should watch the original 1954 Godzilla. But I will also say Godzilla versus
He would
Megalon.
Say that for any episode. I just want
to. Absolutely. But I will say Godzilla versus Megalon for maximum camp. Also, like I said, because it really embraced the fact that they were dudes in suits pretty hardcore.
Yeah, fair.
Granted, it's not as many like miniatures, like buildings and such, because they fight like out in the middle of nowhere. But those are the two I would say. What about you, bro?
That's super fair. Well, if I haven't made it clear, and maybe we have some Gen Zers or something in the audience who weren't born the same year that this movie came out, but Independence Day, freaking go watch it. It will almost assuredly always hold the record for the most miniatures. And also, I just think, I don't know, I grew up on it. I think it's a fun movie. There's a certain level of emotion that comes out. The president's wife is the same lady who played the president in Battlestar Galactica, and so that also was just like a little nerd for me.
Look at that.
Yeah, would you look at that? So I don't know. Definitely go watch Independence Day. But if you haven't seen The Impossible, I also encourage you to watch that. There are some scenes that are, like I mentioned, pretty guttural. It's not. I wouldn't say it's like the best movie in the world or the best disaster movie in the world, but I do think it's a good showcase for the way that miniatures can be used in disaster movies. And it has more to it than just being a disaster movie. There's a good amount of like real heart-wrenching drama in it as well. So that's basically just me mentioning every movie that isn't Star Wars because I assume everybody else has seen that.
Fair enough. I wouldn't have mentioned it either.
That's what I got to say. So with that being said, cheers.
Cheers.
And thank you all for watching. If you like today's episode, go ahead and feel free to follow us on whatever it is that you're watching or listening to this on. And if you didn't like this episode, don't worry, we still love you.
With all of our hearts.
Well,
not all of it.
Yeah, with all of it. Thank you. All right. Bye.
Can we cheers one more time?
Let's cheers one more time.
One time.
I don't see why not.